Hey, this is Cameron. Welcome to the Metal Roofing Learning Channel. Today we're going to be going over pitch break low to high in this condition. It's commonly seen on Barndominiums and also a lot of like the older vintage barns as well. You see a lot of transitions like this. So let's get started.
This is the Metal Roofing Learning Channel, brought to you by Western States Metal Roofing, where you can find a variety of colors and finishes, all while saving by buying factory direct. Use of the following video content is subject to the warning, disclaimer of warranties, and limitation of liability as set forth on this screen.
Starting off with the pitch break WS437 low to high transition, we're going to be taking a 4 foot long level. We're going to set it on the upper roof deck. We're going to run it out over the top of these panels. And you just want to make sure that these panels are coming up and kind of meeting that snug. You don't want these panels to be coming all the way to the transition, or else your transition trim is never going to work with it. You want this transition trim to be as level or pitched up to keep water rolling down onto the panels below it. As you can see, we haven't set any of our Z closure yet on these panels. You actually want to grab your transition low to high trim, set it up on the upper roof deck, and make sure that everything comes down and you're running plumb. And you also want to make sure that you're tight on both sides with your upper roof deck. So we've got this side set here. I'll go ahead and put a screw in this side just to keep it set while I go over to that other side. And now that we've came over to this side, you want to make sure the same thing. One thing you can do is actually just look out over the edge of it and just check to make sure that this is running flat on the actual roof deck itself. And then we can do the same thing over here. We can just temporarily tack it down. Okay. Then you can go through with your pencil on your lower panels and just make some lines on the actual highs themselves of how far down this lower leg is going to come down the actual roof panels. Now that those marks are made, you know that your Z closure has to be at least above that line. I would recommend going probably a ½ inch up unless you're going to order a custom trim and try to hook the Z closure with the transition trim hem itself. Now that we got our Z closure cut to size, all of our folds done, we're going to take our tape, measure the top flange of our Z closure, which is 1.5 inches. So earlier we had our pitch break trim on here and made our marks on all of our highs. We're going to come up, I'm going to say 2 inches from there, and that's where we're going to start the front of our mastic. So the mastic will be uphill from those 2-inch marks. That way the Z closure is set back about a ½ inch, and then your mastic is going to be set back roughly 2.5 to the center. Here is our mark right here. We're going to come up ½ inch because that's where we want our front face of our Z closure to be. And then we can either chalk line this or we can go through. I'm just going to use our 4 foot level again since we're working with a smaller space. So there's our ½ inch mark right there. And then from there, we're going to come back in 1.5 inches because that's where we're going to want to start the front of our mastic tape. So the end of your trim piece, that pitch break trim we marked out earlier, is this lower line right here. So our ½ inch up is where the front of that Z closure is going to end, and this is where your vertical leg right here is going to start. So there's your vertical leg right there. So what we're going to shoot for is having that front face there. There's your front, the front of your 1 3/4 tall face. So our mastic is going to go behind this line across all the panels. All right, we're going to repeat this process over here. Okay, now that we've got it squared across, We can make a mark on our highs. You can also take your pencil, run it down the pan of the panel. You just want to make sure that it stays vertical. So normally people will actually cut small sections of butyl. They'll just adhere it onto the bottom of the Z closure, but usually they're not going to be doing these fold-ups. There are multiple ways to do it. This is our preferred installation method. So we're actually going to be running that mastic tape solid all the way through. It's going to go all the way up, over, and around the highs. So that way you're not just relying on like a caulk sealant, as that sealant will go bad over time. Compared to a butyl sealant, this is going to have a much longer lifespan. So we've got our mark on the pan of our panel here. We can start adhering this all the way across. You want to make sure that you push the corners in fairly well. You don't want it to be super tight, or else the panel itself will actually end up ripping the mastic. So just want to make sure that everything's tucked in snug. So typically when you get to the end of your run on your mastic, it's usually easiest to cut this with a set of snips, especially when this stuff gets hot. It doesn't want to tear. And when you tear it, it usually stretches out the beginning of the roll again. Okay, and then you just want to make sure that everything is well adhered to the actual panel. And then we can go ahead and peel off this backer here all the way across the panels. And now we're ready for our Z closure. All right, so now we're on to our 3-piece gable detail. You can click on the link above. We're not going to go through the actual trim cleat installation, everything like that. We're just going to go over the different angles on how to make your pitch brake WS437 actually tie in with your gable trim. So the first section that we're going to address here is where your gable trim actually meets your Z closure. You are going to have to trim that back leg just slightly if you ran your Z closure all the way underneath the receiver trim. So we have the vertical leg right here on the Z closure. How it's you can see the mark that it's making as it's running into this. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to pull this piece up just a little bit, and we're going to do a very minimal trim out coming up this. Okay, and now we're going to test fit it and see if we've got enough material removed around that leg to get that to run all the way down tight. And it looks like we've got enough material out there. For demonstration purposes, I am going to be using a Sharpie on this section just so that way you can actually see the markings, as this color does not show it very well. On any other installation, you're definitely going to want to use a contractor's pencil, so that way the lines are not noticeable and you can get them off. So we're going to take this 4-foot level, lay it flat on the roof deck here, and we're going to run it out past to our intersecting point. So you know that the bottom of this level is going to be where this your pitch brake trim is actually going to come off that deck and drop back down to your Z closure. So I'm going to scribe a line back here. And you want to make sure that you get it all the way out to the point here, because it will start to kind of slope off there. Okay, and then we're going to take our speed square, and we're just going to make a line right here on the top. And then we can take our speed square again and actually find the angle of this. So you got your speed square set back in. You're touching your line top and bottom. And then we're going to be looking right up here for our angle. It's actually 22. Okay. So then we're going to set our square right here. Angle actually ended up being about 22 degrees. So we're going to scribe this line out. And I'm going to complete this line just using my square running across here. So what this line's doing for us, it's actually showing us where this next roof deck is going to be running at. You don't want to cut all of this off because you want this to fold down to where you can pop rivet and mastic all of that. That way you don't have any holes in your metal. Okay, now that we got our piece off, we've got our front mark here. We're going to start all the way down here. We're going to start by cutting into this mark all the way up. All right. Okay, and then we're stopping at our top line here from where our intersecting points are. Then we're going to do the same thing on this back side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with the opposite snip now and snip into these corners. That way I can get these to fold under. So on this section over here, we're going to actually leave this a little bit wild right now until we get our next gable trim on. Then we can mark out cut while it's actually on the building. So we're going to trim this guy off. Come back to here. And then I'm going to kind of round this out a little bit because this is about where we're going to want to start putting pop rivets in at. And then on the back side, this is where a majority of our holes are going to come from, so we don't want to take much for material off of this. For right now, I'm going to leave this kind of the way it is and just take this back leg off of it. Okay, now that we've got that off, we're just going to kind of mock it up a little bit here. So if it's straight out, we're going to squeeze those together, fold it all the way in, then we can actually end up pop riveting those with that bigger face. And now that we've got all the angles cut on this, we're going to install this back onto our gable end here. We are going to have to trim just a little bit more off of this because our back leg is actually running into the roof deck here. You don't want to take too much material off, so we're just going to kind of round this off. Then we can tuck it back in, like so. All right, so now that we have this installed, all of our folds, you're able to get all the way down flat on your roof deck. You can pop rivet along this face, since we actually left a fastening flange all the way along here. So you can pop rivet down through. We're probably honestly going to kind of leave it how it is until we get our upper panels and everything on. And then we'll tie the two gables in together. And now that we got our gable trims on both sides, we're going to start with our 7/8 mastic all the way across our Z closure, so that way we can put our pitch brake low to high on and pop rivet everything together. Now that everything's stuck there, we're good to pull off the liner here. We're also going to run some of the 7/8 mastic up the gable trim itself to help seal off that pitch break trim when it's coming over the top of it. We're going to repeat this process on both sides. Okay, and now we are ready to install our pitch break trim. So when setting the piece on, I'm going to kind of keep it tilted up just a little bit. And we know that our corner marks here on our gable are about where we need to be. So I'm going to let that set and then come over to this other side and adjust accordingly. Okay. And once we're all set there, we're now going to take our pan head screws now, and we're going to fasten the top of these. For all of the trims, including this pitch break, we recommend fastening with pan head screws every 12 inches on center, or otherwise, if your engineer specs anything different, then that's what you're going to want to go with on fastening. So we're going to go off our standard right now of roughly 12 inches. Okay, and once you have the back side of this fastened, you can now move to the front and do the same thing. You're going to be pop riveting every 12 inches on center, going across the top, or going across the front face, and make sure that you're hitting that, your leg on your Z closure as well. Okay, and we're going to repeat this process all the way across the piece. Now that this process is all complete, we're done running all of our screws along the top, pop rivets along the bottom. We're going to mark out for our joggle cleat. We recommend fastening the joggle cleat about 6 inches up from the back side of this. So this will be the front face of that joggle cleat running all the way across. So I'm going to mark that on both sides. Okay, so now that we have both of these on the piece, we can now go in with our level over here. Obviously, for longer roof applications, you're going to be wanting to use a chalk line on this. So now that you have this front mark placed, we can measure back roughly 2.5 inches. You're going to want to measure your actual joggle cleat itself and find center or towards the front of that 7/8 mastic. That way we can get our mastic all set in place and have a good straight line to run off of. And then the same thing, we're going to take this, our level again here, and run a straight line all the way across this. Now that this is all set, we can install our mastic, and our joggle cleat will be screwing through the mastic. Now our joggle cleat will be installed using pancake screws as well. And then the same thing with the joggle cleat. Before you end up putting a lot of pressure down on the mastic, you want to make sure that you're up to your lines, that you're tucked inside of your gable trim here. And we can now start putting our screws through. With this joggle cleat, we recommend the same thing, roughly 12 inches on center going all the way across this, unless your engineer otherwise specifies a different dimension. Now that we have our joggle cleat installed, we're going to be running our receiver trims, and we've got some panels prepped and ready to get going on them. So when placing this receiver trim, we're going to want to make sure that this is also flush with the outside of your fascia board, just like how we did on the bottom row as well. Okay, the receiver trim, you're going to be fastening that every 12 inches on center, and we're going to go ahead and repeat this process on the other side. All right, now we got both of our receiver trims on, and we're now ready to start laying our panels down. So one thing that you want to remember is that you started, in our case, we started on the left-hand side with a full width panel. So we're going to be starting again with a full width panel to make sure that these highs line up all the way across the roof. And there's your first panels now hooked and ready to start running across your roof after you clip it and put your header screw up the top. Once we have all of our panels on, obviously the next step would be your Z closure, like we did on this lower section. For demonstration purposes, we're going to show you how to actually install this gable trim and get everything cut to the correct angles. So as you can see with this gable trim, actually just cut plumb. These hems are not going to line up. So what you want to do, you have your extra material that's going to be starting right here at this seam where your other gable trim's folded. And then you also have a spot that you can mark right down here. You want to mark on both of the trims. And then what we can do is take our speed square. We can run an angle from our two marks. Okay, and once we have this marked out, we're going to end up trimming this off. So now that we've got this piece on, we're going to end up scribing this lower hem at the same angle. And we can take this off in the meantime. Okay, and then we have our mark down here. What we're going to want to do is snip right along this line. And then we're going to end up cutting the rest of this hem off. Now that we're at this point, typically you're going to have your trim cleat for your three-piece gable system, and you're going to have your trim cleats that you can actually hook with both of these. In this particular instance, we don't have our trim cleats down since we're not really showing the full three-piece gable installation. So we can hold it up and actually pop rivet with all this extra material through here to keep everything tight and lined up. All right, so we got this all installed. As you can see, this is all just our standard trims. On this particular detail, you're most likely going to want a gable trim with a larger face. That way you can run that gable trim all the way down plumb and flush everything out. This is just standard trim and standard trim. So what we ended up doing was kind of compromising a little bit, cutting this angle into it and making them line up the best that we could with what we had for stock trims.
You can find step-by-step installation videos and homeowner guides on our channel. And don't forget to show your support by hitting the like button and subscribe. Want to learn more? Check out these videos.